record the session. So like to welcome everybody officially into this last session of the day. We started off with some really great presentations sharing the work at Deutsche Telekom with Reza Mousavian first, and then Oliver Herrmann, who's on this call actually. So, and then we had in the last hour, we had Marie Kretlow, who shared some more about design thinking and research. And one of the things that she shared in that was talking about the difference between quantitative and qualitative research, quantitative with the what and qualitative with the why. Andrew's going to tell more about that. And Andrew's one of my favorite go-to subject experts on the topic of analytics, and especially in open text and using text in understanding the voice of the employee and the employee experience. So really glad to have Andrew for this. I wanted to share first, before Andrew, not taking up too much of his time, but just a few pieces of information. We've been doing the last couple of months, since mid-September really, a series of workshops on design thinking, trying to encourage companies to first understand how does design thinking work, and how does it work in this setting, this context, with what we're calling the new human experience of work that's being accelerated by the situation with COVID. And it's really so unique from anything we've ever seen before. I'm sure all of you understand what I'm saying, because we can't mandate or tell people what to do. And so we need to first understand and then co-create with some new solutions and involve them in every step of the process. So Andrew's going to share a little bit about how that works on a scaled level. I wanted to share some first results from the workshop, just a few key learnings, and just maybe see what some of you are experiencing. So let me just share my screen here. And all right, so go to slideshow, current slide. Can everybody see this? Yeah. Okay. So this is the way we see. This is one model that we use a lot of times for end-to-end human experience centric journeys. So I share this because a lot of people say, well, how does this look on a, from a journey perspective, and is there an end-to-end view of this? And this is the model that we've come up with, where you join the company here, and there are different experiences associated with becoming a part of the organization. And then at some point you leave, and maybe in some organizations, like I was talking to somebody in pharma the other day, you come back after you have your postdoc, or you come back later in your career and rejoin the company. So how you create that positive experience and enable people to rejoin is also key. The work circle here is how things get done in an organization. So this includes how we experience the systems, Workday or SAP, as Reza was sharing with us earlier. They created this really cool user interface that made for a better digital experience. But it's also how we experience policies, processes, decision-making, or the lack thereof. This more inner circle is getting closer and higher up in Maslow's hierarchy. So how we learn, grow, take on new assignments, projects, learn how to collaborate with others, how we share learning and knowledge. And then this closest one here to us as human beings, with our emotions at the center, is really about the intersection of life and work. As somebody at GE shared with me years ago, we bring our life to work and we bring our work to life. And this year we're really experiencing this because so many of us are working from home and taking care of children, taking care of elderly parents, taking care of somebody. Some people are even having more pets, new pets and that kind of thing. But how we experience that is a key part of that. These are some examples of some other journeys that sit within these. And these are phrased from the user or the employee perspective. So instead of a candidate experience, it's searching, or what do we do for people who are rejected? GE talked about 2 million people that applied for a job, and only 45,000 were actually hired. So largely 2 million people had that experience of not getting a job, but they all form an impression about GE's brand, their customers. They have friends in their social networks. So creating that experience for those 2 million rather than just the 45,000 is key. So really changes your perspective when you think about it that way. When we talk about tools, these are the things we use to collect information. So some examples here: personas that Reza and Oliver talked about. Creating journey maps, which is something that all three presentations talked about today. Storyboards as another way to look at things. So these are ways of collecting information. So out of all of these workshops, we did these on Mural, and a few of you, I think, participated in this. And we took from all the murals that we did, and these are HR people, mostly like yourselves, talking about their own experience of working from home. And really fun, interesting workshops to hear how people are experiencing work. We heard about, one young mother in San Francisco has 4 children, each in a different school system, each in a different way of learning and using Zoom. We had people that had working spouse that they're changing the workspace with. We had people that are talking about managing a new team, some of which they've never met before. So these are things on that qualitative side, what I was saying about understanding the why, that you can't get from a quantitative survey. So this is, if you look at this here, these are some of the main touch points or stages that they have throughout the workday. These are their actions. These are representative or aggregates of these things from the mural boards that we collected. The green here are the positive emotions or the gains that they talk about. So they're saying no commute means I have more family time. I need that break walking my dog just to clear my head. I see my boss as being more accessible than before. I'm home to help my kids. And I think the difference with this kind of a journey map, especially this one with remote work, is you're seeing the mix of personal and family life. The reds are the pains. So I'm not feeling like I'm getting enough exercise. People talk the most. This is the largest, most frequent theme. I'm having a hard time with that work-life balance. I'm missing that direct contact with others. So some of these things. And the blue are the goals or the problems that they're trying to solve. How can I start my day feeling most organized? How can I set boundaries and still be available to my team or to others? And how can I be sure that I know the needs of others when I don't have that informal interaction before and after a physical meeting space? The red dots are some areas where out of 20 plus workshops, people are saying these are the moments that matter. And most of the comments that we saw around moments that matter were what kind of support or help, or how can I be aware of the help that my team needs? Another secondary one behind this was, how can I be most aware of the needs of my stakeholders or the clients that I have? And most of the participants had children in the household. So their biggest moment that mattered for them was, how can I make sure my kids are successful? And we asked them to plot kind of the emotional highs and lows throughout the day. They start out at a low, feeling uncertain, anxious. I have a lot to organize for the day for both my family and for my work. They're feeling somewhat on top of things by mid-morning as they get themselves and others ready. They're feeling a low point during the middle of the day where they're feeling a bit of exhaustion. One person here, I don't know where this, we had the action, but one person said, I'm eating lunch over my sink. That's how rushed they feel. And then by the end of the day, they're feeling that recharge as they spend time with family. So these are some moments that matter from the different, a sampling of the locations that we did. So you can read these here: Southern California, Northern California, the middle of the US, the East Coast, and a few locations in Europe. And we did a workshop in Sao Paulo as an example. So I'd like to ask you, maybe you could put this in the chat. What are some moments that matter for you during your day? What are some moments that matter? Give you all about 20, 30 seconds to type in something. What's a moment that matters for you? Okay, let's see what everybody's got. So Jennifer, the space between Zoom calls to recharge. Andre, how to find balance in the team involvement. Any others? Okay. So meditation, exercise, reading. So yeah, some very similar things to what we've heard in our workshops. So that, how do you recharge and refresh mentally, emotionally, cognitively from your day? So it's been, when my daughter wakes, can I use the coffee grinder? Very practical moment that matters. Yeah, I was just sharing with Andrew, I've sometimes changing rooms 3 or 4 times trying to conduct 5 o'clock or 6 a.m. meetings and not wake up the household. So yeah, it's just a fascinating time. And we wanted to use this as a way to study, because how often do you have something that is happening to people in every country around the world that's impacting all of us? So our key point with going in and doing these workshops was to understand, but also to teach and share, how could we use design thinking, which I think is a really interesting one because it is such a qualitative approach to all of this. So with that, I'd like to turn the time over to Andrew and share more about his research, which was done on a much larger scale, and some of the themes that he's hearing. So thank you, Andrew. We'll turn the time over to you.
Thanks, Elliot. I'm just sharing the screen. Let me get it on. So Elliot and I had a conversation about a month ago about this. I'd written an article in the beginning of September, which got a lot of traction on some of the data that we had been seeing. The biggest topic that our clients have been asking their employees about since about March had been working from home, and this was a big shift from last year, where it was more focused on things like innovation and there. But because we had such a large, diverse number of clients in different sectors and different parts of the world, we decided to aggregate some of that data where we were able to and look at the overall trend. I have to be a bit careful in terms of what I can share with you. I'm really going to be scratching the surface here, but the sort of text and qualitative data that we've been seeing is really hard to anonymize, and obviously there are very different patterns between organizations. So a bit of a background about what we're doing. We started as one of the first, what's often called people analytics businesses here in Europe in 2010. I'd had a background, including at UBS, where I ran a program for a year and a half called New Joiners Experience, which was trying to sort of standardize and raise the bar for everyone's first 100 days within the organization. And a lot of my analytic skills had come from sitting on the boundary of the HR department and the data they had about employees, and working with the brand team and the brand research team and the experience team within UBS. About 5-6 years ago, we realized that when we were dealing with trying to get executives to take decisions, it was they were mostly acting on the information from the qualitative information. And I know that for those of you on the last conversation, Marie mentioned that the quantitative data tells you, you know, what's happening, and the qualitative data is important for telling you why it's happening. And really, to make a decision and to, especially to act on it, you need to know why it's going to happen, especially with employee type actions. The difference, I think, between a customer intervention and an employee intervention is that for a whole range of different reasons, you can't be necessarily as flexible on an employee as you can on a customer, right? So you can offer a customer a unique package or a unique price if necessary, and that's fine. If you offer a employee a different salary, you then have to balance the whole salaries out in the department to maintain things. So it's often with employees, you're making policy or process changes in a much greater way than you would be doing on customer side, and therefore why is important, arguably even more so on an employee experience side, because of the tools that you can use to take intervention. We started moving more and more into looking at how you scale the understanding of that text. And talking about scale, a lot of our clients are over 50,000 employees strong. If they ask a open text question in a survey, they will get somewhere in the region of 1 and 2 million words. I often describe it in the number of Bibles. 1.5 million words is two Bibles worth of content, and trying to identify what are and summarize the themes in there is really what we do. We've historically done that by looking into the data and identifying the patterns, and then coding all the data against those patterns in a very similar way to what Elliot's just showed on the themes. We've also increasingly moved to having some sort of standardized models. So traditional engagement surveys, for example, or employee surveys, we can now take a piece of text and within a very short period of time, minutes or an hour at the most, summarize and identify what's going on there. I also spent some time educating, which I found a fun thing to do, but don't do enough of it. I teach analytics at one of the local technical universities here in Switzerland. So the data set that we're looking at here was at the time of writing in September, just under 100,000 answers of people being asked specifically about working from home. Since that time, we've gathered another few tens of thousands, so it's a bit bigger, and I'm going to see if I can try and extend a bit in terms of what working from home has meant over the last 2 months. But I think the big difference between 2020 and previously, if we look at our data, we always had picked up working from home as a theme within surveys. But the difference in 2020 is that working from home no longer became part of flexible working for most people. It became something that they had to do whether they wanted it or not. And for many of the employees that we were seeing the data on, this was the first time that they were doing it. Either they were in an organization which hadn't got working from home embedded, or they felt that they weren't able to do it. So it was a new experience for them, and we were trying to pick up in the text what's going on. One of the ways that we look at doing linking the topics is to try and understand how people use various themes together. And the concept behind this is that in understanding text, we talk about co-occurrence when people talk about two themes or more within a particular answer. And using clustering techniques, we can identify how these topics tend to be linked together, and then identify groups of employees who all talk about similar type of topics. It turns out that in most questionnaires or surveys, the topics aren't randomly distributed, but it's certain groups of employees who talk about that. And we can think about this in terms of what Elliot was talking about, in terms of creating clusters and starting and looking at the needs often for personas. We can, with most of our client work, also link in demographic data or what they've said in other survey questions, either that time or potentially at an earlier time, and look at who's saying which. So this for us, this is a real good head start in terms of a data-driven approach of personas. Now, when we looked at the COVID data, there were a few key groups of employees that came out. The central part in the yellow on this slide, with people talking about adapting to working from home, teamwork, decision making, IT requirements. We thought as people who were looking at talking about the operational aspects of working from home. Right, so internet speed comes up there, and internet speed is linked with who's paying for it, right? So home expenses is often linking about internet speed. On the left-hand side, the green, we look at a group who are more negatively focused and see working from home as a more negative aspect. And they're talking about concerns on health. They're talking about the need for having better support for employees. You know, is this going to be a long-term solution? You know, do we need a policy about this? What's the risk of going back into the office? Those type of topics all come together in groups. The other one I wanted to pick up from is the sort of dark pink on the right-hand side, which is people looking at this in terms of the outcomes. So the outcome of work-life balance, the outcome of stress, or as we saw, mostly reduction of stress. Quite a lot of conversation about productivity. We had this topic around doing our best, which was heavily based in the spring, where people were talking about productivity in the work they were doing, but also saying, you know, things like we're doing our best given this scenario, and what we found is that, you know, at the beginning we saw a big jump in people talking about productivity in a positive aspect, but we really didn't know whether people were saying I am more productive because they were more productive, or they were saying I am more productive because they wanted the boss to think they were more productive. And you know, we can get a better impression of that after time, but I think those type of topics are always linked. The solitary purple, environmentally friendly, was, we just saw a lot of people talking about, you know, I'm not spending an hour and a half each way to the office in the car, and this is great for the environment, and I'm, you know, saving a lot of resources. So we started to be able to pull together some main sort of groups of topics that people are talking about. On the productivity part, there was really two aspects when we dug deeper into the productivity. One part is that, you know, in many instances, certainly in the big cities, people were saving 2-3 hours of their personal time, not having to commute every day, and they were giving some of that time back to work. So yes, they would walk the dog, as Elliot pointed out, but they would also, you know, spend a bit more time on meetings and things. And we saw a lot of the productivity improvements was actually they were doing more work, right? So they were spending more time doing work. The other aspect of it was around an efficiency, and we saw things such as distractions, reductions of distractions being mentioned as reasons why they're more productive. In fact, it was interesting that groups of employees that you would think had to be in the office, so, you know, in a pharma company, the research and development folks in the labs, they were saying, spending a day or two at home so I can do the report writing or crunch the analysis, I just get so much more done on that. So, when we're looking at their opinions and how they want to move going forwards when it's not obligatory to do working from home, the feedback from employees was that they were feeling that for some activities and some tasks that they had to do on a weekly basis, it was more effective to do it at home in quiet than it was in the office. Now, obviously, there's a range of spectrums there. One of the quotes that we saw in terms of the amount of work is that we started to see an issue that we've seen in text data for some time, which is work encroaching on home life. So in most instances, the employees seem to be happy to be able to give a few more hours to do it. You know, people talked about not missing deadlines anymore because they had the time to do this type of work. But there were more instances of mentions of the work encroaching there. You know, people talking about having to be always on, being at home. You know, and from my perspective, this is something that we as organisations need to think carefully about: is how do we create that balance and how do we promote it within there. Please, if you have any questions, throw them front. I'm not looking at the chat screen, so Elliot, so if you do see anything come up on the chat, then do interrupt me and let me know.
I was muted, sorry about that. Just a question about
Yes.
method. So if somebody wants to do something similar to this, where you're looking at more qualitative, what are 2 or 3 things that you would recommend they do? How would they get started or set up?
So I think one way is to have a look at the data that they've already got. Even if you're not, even the clients of ours who are not asking specifically about working from home, or you know, we'll have about 15-20% of people this year talking about working from home in a question about, you know, general working for organization. Actually, there's very few topics at the moment we're seeing, you know, very few data sets which we don't see the mention of COVID or working from home in there. Starting with the existing data is always useful because it's rarely been analyzed at the sort of level that we can get insight out of it, and it's very cheap because you've already collected it, and it's not at all disruptive. If you're going out and asking a question, let's say you've decided that you want to optimize people's experiences of working from home, I would be asking, you know, a few scale questions. Elliot and you and I have talked about asking sort of a friction type question about how easy it is to work from home. You probably would be asking on a general level something like an ENPS, or if you're using engagement within the organization, you know, looking at those type of metrics. But then asking a positive question and a negative question. We always find that you get better data if you ask those 2 questions. So in terms of consumer NPS, it would often be, you would ask the ENPS question and then why did you say that? And you assume that people who are positive give positive answers and people who are negative give negative. We found that you get some of your best complaints, or certainly areas to improve, if you ask everybody, you know, what can we do to improve this? The people who are really happy almost always can find reasons why, you know, of things extra you could do better. And likewise, those who are negative, you know, in NPS terms of detractor, will think of some things that are positive. And we like to think about it in terms of, you know, how you'd give a performance review to an employee. You know, you'd always try and give you know, this is what you did well this year, this is what you could improve on. And we found the same sort of approach is best with employee data. It also tackles a key issue with text, which is that sentiment analysis tools and sentiment analysis techniques at the moment are just not really great. I mean, the best in class accuracy according to the studies is around 65 to 68%. I used to think that was atrocious until I saw a paper last year that said that there's only a 60-something% agreement on sentiment if you get 2 people to compare sentences. So it's something humans, you know, we all think we can do it, but actually you don't get a good agreement if you do it, if lots of people do it, and therefore it's pretty impossible to get a computer to do the same sort of thing.
Great, thanks.
So we saw stronger levels of commitment, stronger levels of engagement. And in fact, one of the big topics of across all firms, and I speak to my peers in other analysis organizations, everybody's seeing either ENPS or engagement rising in 2020. Certainly we see this consistently within the data. Now, the working from home, I think this quote is an interesting one because it's saying, if I can work from home here, I'm never going to leave. Well, if everybody's offering the same terms and conditions, then you don't have any competitive advantage. And I think there's some of it's going to be that 2020 has reset employees' views of how they could do work. And I think if you go into recruitment in 2021 and say, we expect you in the office 5 days a week, it's going to be a big disincentive to hiring. We also see quality of life improvement. I love this quote, especially because of the quote about the vending machine at the bottom. And, the people were able to do it. They're able to walk the dog in the middle of the day. They're doing more exercises. We saw a lot of companies talking employees where the company had organized exercise classes online on Zoom and things like that. So there's been a big effort to try and do this. And when we look at stress, it's predominantly on a positive section as we'll look at. It's people talking about reduced stress overall, although obviously there's positives and negatives there.
Andrew, Andre's asking a question. Would people tend to bias their answers towards more positive just to make sure home office opportunity stays in place? What happens there?
It wouldn't surprise me. Yeah. There are very few, one of the things we did early in the summer is we captured all of the data which suggested that that mentioned the time of how often they wanted to spend in the office, and we found that the most frequently mentioned one was a couple of days a week. So the people want to spend about half the time in the office and half the time at home. As I mentioned a bit ago, when I looked at all this data suggesting people were talking about becoming more productive at home, I did think that originally that they were trying to, they felt concerned that the boss wouldn't think they were working. And we've certainly seen a lot of organizations, foolishly in my view, putting in place snooping technologies to watch how long people sit in front of their computers and things like that. So there's a good chance that they're trying to cover that sort of thing. Very few people want 0 days at home. Very few people want five days want 5 days at home, and it's usually 80-something% will be between 2 and 4 days at home. And it really depends on the type of role.
How do you
can never go on with that? Yeah.
Sorry. I was going to ask, how do you check against bias? Are there questions you can ask that kind of help you challenge an assumption that you might be getting about the answers, or that would help people answer more honestly?
I think that it's a really great question. I think the way I tend to think about it is this data more or less biased than other forms of data, right? So when you're interviewing somebody face to face on a traditional qual thing, you can look in their eyes and you can, if you think they're not being entirely honest, you can ask follow-up questions in that, and you can't potentially at the moment in more survey type approaches. But it's a lot harder to sort of fake the answers in text, because you can start reading it, and you have to take a lot more effort to write to put by trying to put bias or suggest something in text than you would on a Likert scale question, for example. So an example is India. So India, historically, when we've looked at data, almost all our clients, the data in India is super high, right? So 90-something% engagement would be quite common on an Indian engagement survey, on a traditional one. Whereas the sort of opinions of folks in India and other countries tend not to be so dissimilar if you're looking at qualitative questions. So we see a similar sort of levels of things. Obviously, there's some regional topics or that are different, but it's the sort of the way that people talk about the positives and negatives are much more common across geographies for text than they can be in some areas. And I say Asia on traditional employee surveys, people seem to give very, very high ratings where they wouldn't, us Brits or you in America tend to be a lot more cynical sometimes.
Thanks.
One of the things we've had in some of the data, and I think, Elliot, you'll share these slides, will you, later?
Yes.
Yeah. So one of the things we can do in some of our data is that we've been working with clients on an ongoing basis, and therefore at an individual level, we can work out how people's rating has changed over time. So this is, for me, this is one of the most powerful ways you can do analysis. And it's something that's harder to do in customer feedback because it's rare that you'll get so many interventions and so many times that somebody will answer similar sort of questions. In employee surveys, especially with the increase of what's called pulse surveys, where you may be asking somewhere between a monthly and a quarterly shorter survey, you can look at group working out how many points on an eNPS scale they've changed. And that's what we're trying to show here. So on the horizontal, on the x-axis, we show the difference in from the last survey, last pulse survey. So, and we found the orange line is at about 0.25, which suggests that on average, people's scores have gone up, quarter of an NPS score since the last time they ran the survey. On the y-axis, we put a line at just over 7, which was their average eNPS for the whole group. And then we can look at the topics that we found and plot them in terms of the average, both NPS rating and also movement for each topic. So this becomes interesting because you can see on the top right that people who are talking about things such as productivity have gone up about 1.5 points on the NPS scale in this data set. Customer communications, same. People talking about employee support, again, well over 1%, and they're 7.5, 8. People talking about meetings now. Well, the meetings have happened. That's seen a big jump, and also they're starting to go towards promoters. And on the other side, and we'll look at this, there's a whole range of different topics around risk and workload and hours and shift. And we've seen that those people talking about that in terms of working from home have seen a drop in their NPS, and many of them are now at levels where they would be in detractor territory. So if I look at a comment around the stress, you start seeing that people are mentioning stress in a positive way from the comments. And this is, it would be unusual, I think, for us to have thought about before that stress would be people talking about less stressed. And yet in a comment, you can see quite obviously the sort of context that people are using to do that. And if we look at there, I've highlighted the stress point. The people who mention stress are still likely to be detractors, but they're likely to be moving up since the previous quarter within this large organization. So we can start thinking about which topics people are talking about, and arguably they were much more stressed in the past, and now they're less stressed. right? And that's seen a rise, but it's still on average not brought them into a passive type of characteristic. We've seen quite a lot in terms of support. So I think there's been some organizations who've said people work at home, you know, here's your laptop with login, get on with it. And we've seen both reactions from management about how to manage people working from home and how to adapt to that, and they're wanting their employers to support them in that. And we've also seen it from the individuals. You know, for many people, as I said at the beginning, it's something completely new, and they're wanting to find support into, you know, how to do this better and how to work from home. We've also seen people talking about this in terms of career, and this has been a relatively balanced. There are, especially in some locations, so in a global organization with smaller offices, there's been talk about, you know, if everyone's working at home and we don't need to be sitting next to each other in the office, that might give me more opportunities for development, because I can be doing my job from, you know, if I can do it from home, I can do it from Istanbul, right, or wherever. So we've been seeing people thinking that this will be help on the career development. On the same side, we've also seen people concerned that they're out of sight and out of mind, and this might negatively impact. I think this would, you know, if this situation lasts another 6 to 9 months and we've done a full cycle, then we might see these topics becoming more informed as somebody's done a performance reviews. Communication across firms has been predominantly strong. I think it's fair to say that vast majority of firms have decided to over-communicate at this. But Elliot, you mentioned in the thing about people feeling that their managers are being more accessible, and we see that, and also conversations around, you know, the leaders being more approachable, even if it's just seeing them sitting in their home office with their dog running in and out occasionally. I think this humanizes the situation a lot more, and removes this sort of them and us type of environment. But we don't see it necessarily. Sorry, I jumped my head by myself. And in terms of health, the vast majority of organisations have handled this. Seem to have handled this situation very well. This was from an engineering firm, so most people didn't have the option to work from home outside the sort of corporate functions. You know, it was a heavily manufacturing-based organization, but we see a lot of comments around just how well organizations have dealt with this. It's probably the people that we see saying that the organizations haven't done a good job tend to be in the minority, and it tends to be specific examples, which I'll come on to in a moment. And this type of group that doesn't feel well is almost exclusively within one category. So if I was putting numbers onto this, I would say it's about 15% of all employees that we've seen globally, and we can't detect any sort of demographic or sort of organization level factors around this. And this is a group of employees who are scared about going into the office, right? Who either are in the office because they have to, and they're really concerned about their colleagues who don't have to come into the office coming into the office, or that they are scared about the chance of catching COVID whilst being at work and bringing it back to home and making their friends sick. What we see here is, if somebody's in this group, we see big drops in the level of engagement or NPS. So this is an example of a sentence of somebody who a quarter a year ago was promoter. They were giving a 9 on their NPS scores, and they've moved to a 2, which probably puts them within that organization in the bottom 5-10%. And that type of shift in a quarter is really rare. It occasionally happens when you see performance review conversations which have gone really badly wrong. But we see this type of drop. So overall, we still see growing levels of engagement or ENPS, but with this sort of 15% of the population who feel that they're not being put in a safe environment, we see really big drops. And I think, given our experience of looking at this data, these people are now, waiting to leave. I think that's a fair thing to say. We rarely see somebody making such a big drop and then the organization recovering that relationship. If we look at the movement graph, it's these sort of topics that they're talking to about returning to the office, the organization needing to do COVID testing for people who are coming back to the offices, the risk, the fact that the management aren't being trustworthy or honest about the situation. That's often when organizations haven't communicated when people have been ill. These topics are all likely to see big drops whether in your target variable, whether it's engagement or ENPS, and almost all of them now, those people mentioned those topics are in detractor categories if we're looking at NPS. So if I look at my data and try to look at some recommendations, I think there's 3 there. Firstly, it's about, there's been a real strong need within organizations this year to measure and to measure more frequently. So I've spoken to 2 organizations over the last 2 weeks whose management stopped measuring this year. I think that was a bad idea.
Wow.
If we think about the need for measurement, if something's changing or you expect it to change frequently, and opinions around working from home and the environment and work have caused a lot of change, and our data now is very different than the data we were seeing in March and April, you need to measure more frequently. So to give you an example, if I'm on when I'm trying to lose some weight or doing some more sport, I might take my weight measurement on a relatively frequent basis because I hope in vain things that I might be losing weight. I can't remember measuring my height in the last year because, frankly, I never changed my height. So things that we don't expect to change, we don't need to measure often. If we expect it to change, we should be measuring often. And certainly, I think, of all the cases we've seen over the last 10 years, this is causing the most change in attitudes to work, and therefore companies really should be on top of it. I think there's potential benefits from looking at it here. Secondly, there's an aspect in terms of some companies have assumed that employees will just be able to make this work, and there's quite clear feedback that employees are really looking for support into doing this. We talked about the training instances. There's also been a lot of conversation about needing support in terms of making the workplace, the home office, more successful. So, we see more and more people complaining that sitting on a laptop on Zoom calls every day, they're getting sore backs and necks. People are looking for ergonomic type equipment. Right from the beginning, people were saying, my internet connection just isn't strong enough to do this, and they were looking for support and financial support for some of these home office type things. Obviously, what you do will depend on local legislation and what's important, and I think that's in flux at the moment. But people obviously saving a lot of money from not having to commute and not going to the office, but they're also expecting organizations to pay them back as well in terms of increasing their, supporting their working from home environments. And, I think there's going to have a conversation with the most organisations, what's needed to, what's going to happen, and how that's going to balance out. And the final point, which unfortunately I just noticed that this version hasn't got the bottom details in, working from home is most productive and most successful when it's a choice. And 2020 has been a year when, for most people, that hasn't had a choice. But some people will want to continue working from home significantly. As I said, very few will want to do it full time, and some people will want to do it least. But I think and certainly the academic data that was done before has suggested that the most effective times that you get this productivity benefit is when workers can balance when they're working from home and when they working in the office. And I said at the beginning that previously flexible working for us, our model's flexible working, including working from home. I think as soon as we can return back to those days, then we'll see working from home becoming more and more welcomed by employers worldwide.
Great, thank you, Andrew. Any questions before we close? You can either unmute or write it in the text in the chat. So, yeah. So thank you to everybody for participating in this today. I really appreciate Andrew sharing his time and this study. It's certainly interesting to see some of the reasons why people are talking about this. And I also appreciate from Andrew the deep insight into behavioral patterns as people move from one side to the other. I think that's an important part also in all of this, to recognize why people are moving from being engaged or being net promoters or being satisfied to being unsatisfied, to pay attention to that side of it as well. Certainly in this situation, working from home, it's going to go on for another, probably till the second half of next year, where we see 80-90% of some organizations or all. It's going to be more important to understand why people are doing what they're doing. So again, thanks everybody. For those of you who are with us for all the sessions today, thank you for joining. We'll have a webinar on December 3rd with Lorado from BCX, who is a tech company in South Africa. So we're bringing you a different regional perspective on using design thinking and building the human experience of work. But thanks to everybody for today, and look forward to seeing you next time. Thank you.
Thanks, Alex.